All around the world, water and energy have become the defining issues of our time. Not surprisingly, the question of who controls and benefits from these vital natural resources and essential services is paramount.
In an era of climate change and peak oil, renewable energy, hydroelectricity in particular, is literally worth its weight in gold. And to be giving away control of that energy to the private sector is crazy.
There's a massive move in Canada to privatize our public assets.
Energy is an essential service, and the good thing about operating a public utility is that rates can be kept modest for citizens.
The reality is that in all of these jurisdictions where markets have been introduced, gaming and price fixing and price manipulation have been characteristics of the system.
In Canada, a country that generates close to 60% of its electricity from relatively clean hydroelectricity, a battle is raging between global corporate powers vying to seize control of publicly owned energy assets and a growing grassroots movement intent on protecting them. While the circumstances and stakeholders differ from region to region, these battles have much in common, and we can learn a great deal by sharing what we've learned.
The privatization and deregulation and restructuring of British Columbia's entire electrical system and transference of enormous wealth and resources to the corporate sector does present a threat to our communities, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal.
The goal of this short video series is to bring together experts, activists, and lessons from across the country to identify patterns in this corporate and government-driven privatization campaign, and to empower communities with information, tools, and techniques to mobilize and protect their public power systems.
Grassroots can be made very effective, and in fact it is what is behind all of the really great social movements. So if you look at the civil rights movement, the environmental movement, and many other movements, you'll find that they come from the grassroots.
The only force standing between us and the complete loss of our natural resources are the people themselves, us.
The push to privatize Canada's bountiful natural resources and public energy assets threatens the future of our economy, environment, and society. In almost all cases, the privatization or deregulation of public power systems has fostered an arbitrarily inflated electricity market and dramatic rate increases, creating, in the process, a social problem known as energy poverty, where vulnerable population groups are forced to choose between eating and heating. There are many social benefits associated with a publicly owned electricity sector. Energy security and long-term energy planning are defined by domestic energy requirements and forecasting, rather than a culture of consumption that is typical of private systems driven by profit.
Public power brings a public good, and you have transparency and accountability. You have the ability to engage in conservation, which private power companies wouldn't want to engage in.
Conservation and private enterprise for profit don't really mix well with each other. The basis of these two different modes of thinking, one of them is conservation, the other one is based on consumption.
Also, revenues generated by public utilities are reinvested into the province's own infrastructure, supporting vital social programs and services, like public health care and education.
That money is reinvested back into the province by contributions to the public treasury.
Not that long ago, the province of British Columbia received up to $750 million annually from its crown utility, but those public dividends are being wiped out today by its costly private power program. It is also a fact that the most affordable electricity rates in North America are in jurisdictions with public power systems.
Quebec Hydro, Manitoba Hydro, and BC Hydro. We still have the lowest rates of any jurisdiction in North America.
Thanks to strong social values that support public services, the people of Quebec have largely kept private interests at bay.
I think they still have a strong view that the public control of the system is vital to the interests of Quebec. And so while they have purchased some energy from some new private power developments, in the big picture, this is not what is driving policy within Quebec. The same is true if we look at Manitoba. Again, they do export a fair amount of their electricity and have been using Manitoba Hydro as a vehicle for development. But again, they haven't abandoned the public model.
It's an altogether different story in Ontario, where the restructuring of its electricity sector failed to deliver what the Harris-Eves Conservative government promised. Early on in this process, a well-organized and vocal grassroots movement to protect public power emerged in Ontario, opposing provincial energy policy through educational materials, community events, and earned media. Nevertheless, the provincial government pushed ahead, and today, rates are significantly higher, security of supply has been undermined, and integration with the US system means that Ontario has far less control over its electricity future.
The provincial government no longer has the amount of control over the system that they used to have. And in fact, there are many private players over whom they have very little control. At the same time, they want to trigger more environmental conservation and they want to trigger more environmentally responsible generation. And the way they're ending up doing that is by hugely subsidizing private generators in Ontario, because they can't put, as it were, Humpty Dumpty back together again. They're stuck with this deregulated model that Harris imposed on them.
In British Columbia, an epic battle is now playing out, often promoted to corporate shareholders as the Saudi Arabia of green energy for its abundant power potential, which is why some of the world's largest corporations are working hand in hand with the provincial government to seize it for themselves. Tens of thousands of citizens from every region of the province have mobilized in opposition to these privatization plans, advocating for conservation initiatives, ecological protection, and authentically green energy solutions through public ownership, comprehensive regional planning, strict compliance to environmental standards, recognition of First Nations title and rights, and projects that will truly benefit communities, not just corporate interests. The BC Energy Plan prohibited BC Hydro from developing any new public renewable power projects, effectively forcing the Crown utility to purchase huge quantities of electricity from private power producers at double or more the market rates. Much of this power comes from private run-of-river projects, portrayed as green because the energy produced doesn't emit greenhouse gases directly. But the fact is, these projects inflict significant ecological damage. Construction typically involves extensive logging, digging, and rock blasting in pristine wilderness areas, as well as diverting rivers through massive pipes extending for miles. The result has been severe damage to old-growth forests, waterways, wildlife, and numerous aquatic species.
Our wild rivers and streams are literally the beating hearts of these wild ecosystems.
You go in and industrialize a river, you reduce the fish population, you reduce the bear population, the water running down the river, which has a natural tendency to cool and water the region around the river, is suddenly lost.
Adding insult to injury, the intermittent power that these projects produce comes mostly during the spring freshet, the annual thaw of snowpack in the mountains that causes river levels to rise dramatically for a brief period. The freshet is generally a period when BC Hydro's reservoirs are full, so the province has little need for additional electricity. Thus, the public utility is forced to export virtually all of the surplus privately generated power it has purchased at market rates, which are well below the cost they paid for it initially. The result has been a veritable gold rush on BC's rivers by private companies, including nearly 800 rivers and creeks staked so far for potential development. This Google map illustrates the massive number of private power projects and proposals slated for the province. The blue markers show private hydro facilities already in operation. Licenses granted for project construction are shown in green, and project proposals currently awaiting approval are indicated in red. To date, well over $40 billion in Sweetheart Energy purchase agreements have been signed already, with terms and conditions negotiated in secrecy.
So we hand over our rivers to General Electric and Plutonic Power, and what do we get for it? We promise to pay them for the power back at inflated rates that are 3 or 4 or 5 times what BC Hydro can generate the power for. So we're paying them to take our assets. That's a bad deal.
But widespread public opposition has given rise to a provincial citizens' movement determined to halt this destructive plan. Among other things, the battle in BC raises an important issue: the use of greenwashing and astroturf groups to create a favorable public opinion about the provincial energy policy.
What this really is sort of a green version of disaster capitalism. They're saying, oh my God, global warming, we need to get off fossil fuels, so we'll build, you know, we're going to occupy 700 rivers in British Columbia and build power plants on them and export that energy to California to run air conditioners. That's not green energy. That's just a resource grab.
I mean, this is outrageous. It's unbelievable that we give away the future, essentially, to these companies.
In the following chapters of this video series, we'll examine the challenges to public power across the country in greater detail, and the solutions available to grassroots movements seeking to protect these essential public values and assets.